Well, welcome to the next video in the Ultimate Half-Baked Bitcoin Analysis series. In this video, we will cover Crisis 2. We'll first talk about the prelude to Crisis 2, and then we'll lead into the details about Crisis 2 and the aftermath. Now, if you haven't watched the previous videos, you'll definitely want to check those out. They're linked below down in the description, or if you're on the page on my website, you'll see the order to watch the videos. So let's jump in. So we're coming off Crisis 1. We covered that in the last video. Off Crisis 1, we do capture some key levels. One of the most important level that we do capture is the 50% of the all-time mass awareness high right here around 9,800. Now, the result of Crisis 1 really does a pretty good strong move up to around 14,000. So that's a really good strong move. You'd like to see that. Where Crisis 3 starts to begin, and really you start to see the early clues of Crisis 2, meaning that there's going to be another crisis in the actual price action, is right here, right around 22 September 2019, 23 September 2019. First up, what happens there? You should immediately see, if you look to the right of the chart, it gives up 50% of the all-time high. Now, it did that previously here back in 16 July 2019, but you notice an important thing happened around this area. The RDA, the yellow line, held up. So really it came up, it went back and checked the RDA, it did close below it once, and then it closed above it. It went back and rechecked it. This is another area where you would potentially want to be long, and then as it bounced off that, it remained momentum long. Now what you really should have done, what you should have been able to do from this level, is you can see that there is an overall value channel here. So we have an overall value channel. Here's the high and here's the low. And where does that low align with? That low aligns with the Crisis 2 area. So this Crisis 2 area is really where it aligns. It's a little bit above that. So we really want to use a little bit above that, mainly because of this is where, when you're looking at trading within that value channel, you really want to set the levels that are accurate to the price action that is unfolding. So the first thing that we see here is that it does trade here. The purple line is 50%. That 50% aligns really well with the 50% all-time mass awareness high. So this day here where it gives it up, this is really the first clue that, hey, maybe there's going to be another test of those previous levels. And maybe this is something we should watch. Now we do see the price action once it loses the 50, it comes down here and retests that really upper level of that area. Comes back, tries to recapture the 50%, and then we get into Crisis 2. In Crisis 2, something really interesting happened here. This is around March 2020. In the document, in the Ultimate Bitcoin Analysis document, I go back and I share some stories and narratives from this time, so you'll definitely want to check that out, because I think it is valid. I think some of the stories and narratives, because what happened around March 2020, we all know the virus that wasn't created in a lab did turn into a pandemic. So that really was the narrative here. And this is a liquidity event. A lot of people are looking at this as a liquidity event. Number one, margins were being called. Number two, the markets were selling off everywhere. There was a lot of uncertainty, obviously, out in the markets. So anywhere that you could get cash, you were getting cash. And this is actually, it's been turned Black Thursday, this day here. And this is Crisis 2. And Black Thursday, if we see that day, this is one of the biggest sell-off days Bitcoin has ever had. That is roughly a 40% sell-off of the body. If we go to the low, it's roughly a 41-42% sell-off in one day in Bitcoin. So that is a pretty huge, substantial move. You don't see that often. So that definitely is one of those standout days. It's another important price day in Bitcoin, the first day we talked about in one of the previous videos. Now, from a chartist perspective, when you're looking at this next crisis, first up, right here, it gave up the RDA, it gave up momentum. That was your first clue that maybe something bigger is about to happen. Right here on 8 March 2020, you really had no business being long. Really, this is the official, it was already short momentum here, but really right here when it gave up the weekly level and then it gave up the momentum in the RDA, you had no business being long. You really were looking for a lower level. Your first level would have been here, right at this level here, but it really solidly traded through that. Now let's talk about where Crisis 2 stopped. Crisis 2 stopped right here, right around 3,900, 38.76. We go back in the chart and we see, do we see any clues from a chartist perspective of what we would like to see from a strength perspective, some liquidity perspective, from an overall trading perspective? Did it stop at a key level? And I'm sorry, I'm saying crisis 2. What I mean is crisis 1. So if we turn on crisis 1, the value channels here, and let me just turn some of this off. Let me pause the video. This yellow line right here where it says second crisis low, where did it reach? You'll see right there, and it's hard to see, but it stopped right at the 50% of this lower value channel. It also stopped right around the 25% of the overall channel, but it stopped at 50% of this overall lower channel. Once again, from a chartist perspective, as a retest of you have a liquidity event, you have a major market, you have a major worldwide liquidity event, and you have an asset, okay? And that asset is selling off because of various margin calls, because of various liquidity calls, because people need cash, whatever the reason. What you would like to see on an asset selling off, on an idea selling off, is for it to hold a key level and for it to have a strong reaction from a key level. That would mean that the next crisis, the price crisis of, and just imagine if it would have closed below this level, 4,000, if Bitcoin would have closed below 4,000, the narrative would have been much different, especially if it stayed down there for a while. The fact that it tagged that level and immediately started then holding, what do we see here? As soon as it did that, it started recapturing momentum. It started holding the weekly levels. So these white lines you see here are the weekly opens. And you'll see from that point forward, it was showing strength as far as maintaining the weekly levels. It eventually comes back and captures the RDA right here, back on 23 April 2020. At that point in time, it's already momentum long. It's already been holding up the weekly levels. You've got a breakdown candle right here, that major breakdown candle, and it did what you would expect. It didn't even really stall there. What it did, this aligns with the 200 mixed average as well. If we look at that level here, it's another narrative you want to carry forward, is that it traded right through it. Traded right through it, and what did it do? It came back and retested that level, and it held up the RDA at this level as well. So it held up the RDA. So not only did it trade right through that level, it came back, it retested, and it held the RDA, and it continued to hold the RDA as it went out. And the next level that you really were concerned with was the 50% of the all-time high. Once it retested this in Crisis 2 was quick. It's one of the biggest sell-off days, and if you look at this sustained sell-off, it's a pretty huge sustained sell-off. You've got a really sustained sell-off of 55%. It's pretty big. So when you look at it from that perspective, that's Crisis 2. So typically when you're looking at these crises from a chart perspective, and you're looking at price action crisis, what you're looking for is you're looking for Crisis 1, and Crisis 1 typically lasts a little bit longer. It's in a range, it's in a lower range, and it's really whether or not the viability of that asset or that ticker or whatever it is going to hold or maintain. If it comes out of Crisis 1, then you expect a Crisis 2 check. And that Crisis 2 check should be relatively quick. It shouldn't hang out around there. It should really just come down there, check it. It should be a swift reaction, and it should hold structure from that point forward. Thereafter, there typically is a third crisis. And that third crisis is going to be a mix between Crisis 1 and Crisis 2. What you're really looking to do on that third crisis, and if we carry on the narrative here, what happened thereafter? What happened thereafter is, number one, it took out, it took out the 50% all-time mass awareness high. It rechecked it here. And then once it rechecked it, it held the RDA. So you'll see the RDA, it did close beyond the RDA. It is above the 200 mixed average. Held the RDA. Once it started holding the RDA and momentum, it just took off. And it just took off and it made a new all-time high. So once it went back and checked Crisis 1 area, it then held up structure. It continued to build strong price action structure to the upside and continued to hold momentum. There is really only one area where you would have questioned whether or not the momentum was going to hold, and that was right here around September 2020. You have a sell-off. It does break the RDA. It doesn't get below these key levels here. So if you were to draw a value channel, it holds the top of this value channel. And it holds it for a really, this time in the chart is really interesting because it's a time of indecision that you don't see that often, but it does happen. And it's this area right here between September 2000 or 02 September 2020 to 09 2020. This area here, it's just holding those lows, and it's just holding those lows very, very cautiously. And it's holding those lows at a key level, a key weekly level. The other thing that it's doing is once you have those levels defined, it never breaks that level. So this level here, I would say, going forward as you carry this narrative forward, this level here is another important level. It's near the 50% mass awareness high. So of course it's near an all-time level, and that's really what it's doing. You can see this. It's testing. It's saying, do I want to hold the 50% all-time high? Yes, 1 day. Yes, 2 day. Yes, 3 day. Yes, 4 day. Yes, 5 days. Yes, 6 days. Finally, it holds up. Let's come back and retest the key level from the daily, and it holds up the key level from the daily, and from there it just takes off. So it's really these little clues in the chart that you see, especially when you view it from the narrative of crises, that you can pick up on, and you can create rules around, and you can start trading around any ticker, especially with the system that I'm sharing. My system works very well with additional price action and level rules, which is in the system. It works very well. So this is the result of Crisis 2. Crisis 2 happened quick. You typically see that on Crisis 2. Structure starts to build, the weekly starts to hold, it trades solidly through some key levels, it holds the 50% of the all-time high, the all-time mass awareness high. From there, it's given permission, so to say, to create various inflection areas and to just take off and make an all-time new high. That's kind of where it's at right now. So the next video in this series, what it will do, it will break down current price action. And then this will be a members only video, so I do apologize for people that aren't members. I will break down some scenarios for Crisis 3. We'll break down various ways that this will unfold. We'll break down the narratives of the liquidity crisis. I do think it will be an all-out assault on Bitcoin. I do think Crisis 3 will be an all-out assault. I think it will be hit from multiple vectors of attack. I think it will be very interesting to live through. Hopefully I'll still be alive when this happens. If not, I've really shared with family members and key people what to do. If this does happen, I do expect a third crisis. Third crisis will, everything we've covered thus far in this video should give you enough ammunition or information to go out there and build a strong plan to trade into the third crisis and to trade outside of the third crisis. So that's really what, from all my data analysis and the ultimate Bitcoin analysis, everything else that I'm thoroughly convinced there's going to be a third crisis. It's starting to play out initially here, but I am convinced there's going to be a third crisis, and it's not going to look like the first two. It's going to look completely different. So if you're a member, you'll see that video in the membership site. Down below, you'll see how to become a member. So it's really easy. It's one-time cost. It includes all my indicator, my trade system, everything I ever add in trading. And I do appreciate everybody that's watched these videos. Feel free to leave comments, leave insight, I'm open to any conversations. This chart also, as members, you'll be able to download this chart with all the actual object tree labels, all the levels, everything else out there, so that you can go out and trade against this chart or use this chart for your technical analysis. So that's all. I look forward to seeing you in the other videos that I release on my channel. Thanks.